$625 million. Just take a second to really process that number. That's not the GDP of some small island nation. It is the amount that vanished in a single blockchain hack back in March 2022. It's a staggering figure, and it perfectly illustrates the incredibly high-stakes dangers lurking right behind the trillion-dollar potential of tokenized real-world assets.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're cutting right through the hype of tokenized real estate and private credit to look at the invisible, highly complex plumbing required to actually make this work securely. We're talking about the unseen architecture. This is the critical infrastructure needed to tokenize the real world without suffering crippling fees or falling victim to broken systems.
Okay, let's dive into this architectural blueprint. We'll be hitting 5 key areas today: fixing liquidity fragmentation, solving the Oracle problem, the real cost of tokenization, hardening security architecture, and finally, lessons from mega hacks.
All right, kicking things off with Part 1, fixing liquidity fragmentation.
Think back to the early days of the internet for a second, before the universal TCP/IP standard came along. You had these completely separate competing networks like ARPANET and AOL, complete with those awful screeching dial-up tones, and users on one literally couldn't communicate with users on another. Well, believe it or not, that is exactly the state of today's blockchains. If you tokenize a commercial building on Ethereum and a bond portfolio on Solana, they're trapped in isolated liquidity islands. To move between them, you have to use these things called bridges, and as we'll see a bit later, those are incredibly complex and have historically been massive targets for hackers.
So to fix this, the infrastructure needs a massive upgrade. Enter Polygon's AG layer, which stands for aggregation layer. Think of it as a universal translator. Imagine individual blockchains are like different branches of a global corporation, right? They each operate independently with their own ledgers. The AG layer acts like the global headquarters accounting department. At the end of the day, it collects summaries from all those branches, uses some incredibly advanced math called zero-knowledge proofs to guarantee every transaction balances perfectly, and then locks it all into one master entry on Ethereum. It literally makes thousands of distinct chains feel like one single unified network.
And here's how major issuers are actually using this out in the wild. A one-chain-fits-all approach? Yeah, that just doesn't cut it anymore. Instead, sophisticated players use a 3-part hub-and-spoke model. First, they issue their asset on a tightly controlled custom enterprise chain, maybe even using their own branded stablecoin to pay for transactions. Second, they deploy that token out to major public blockchains like Ethereum or Solana to tap into all that massive DeFi liquidity. And step 3, they tie the whole shebang together with an interoperability hub like the AG layer. It's an absolutely brilliant setup because it combines strict private control with vast public liquidity. Everyday investors get the absolute best of both worlds: rock-solid safety and effortless trading.
But connecting the chains is really only half the battle. Let's move on to Part 2, solving the Oracle problem.
To grasp why this is such a massive vulnerability, you really have to understand this one concept. Blockchains are blind. They are purely deterministic, isolated computational environments. If a smart contract could just randomly search the internet for the value of a property, every single node on the network might pull a slightly different answer, and the whole consensus mechanism would break. They simply can't do it. So they absolutely depend on oracles, which are just trusted external messengers, to grab real-world facts and feed them safely onto the blockchain. Now, delivering that data isn't a simple one-size-fits-all thing, and it's fascinating to see how the top players tackle it. Take Chainlink CCIP. They use independent, economically staked nodes. Basically, if they lie, they literally lose their own money. It's the gold standard for big institutional transfers. Then you have Pyth Network, which is built for pure speed. They pull data straight from first-party sources like massive trading firms, delivering sub-second latency for highly liquid assets. And finally, you've got Redstone. They use a really clever pull-based model. Instead of constantly paying network fees to update a price on-chain, they only update it when someone specifically requests it. Super cost-efficient for assets that don't change value every single millisecond.
But what about unique, illiquid stuff? I mean, what is the fair market value of an apartment complex in Phoenix? A crypto price feed definitely can't tell you that. That is where an attestation oracle comes in. Instead of just aggregating trading data, licensed professionals, like a state-licensed real estate appraiser or maybe a Big Four accounting firm, cryptographically sign their physical appraisals or audits and put them directly onto the blockchain. That digital signature absolutely cannot be forged. So the entire chain of custody, from physical inspection all the way to the digital ledger, becomes an undeniably verifiable record. Which actually brings us to the very real financial realities of operating on-chain. Part 3. The real cost of tokenization. The secret here is all in the margins. Just look at the cost for the Ethereum mainnet. Minting a single token transaction can hit $80. Trying to distribute a batch of dividends? That could cost 15 grand. It makes it a playground strictly for whales. You see, Ethereum's built to be an ultra-secure global settlement layer, not a high-throughput transaction processor. But when you shift over to Layer 2 solutions like Polygon, Arbitrum, or Base, or alternative Layer 1s like Solana, those massive fees drop from thousands of dollars to literal pennies.
To really put that into perspective, imagine you're trying to distribute monthly dividends to 10,000 holders on the Ethereum mainnet. Your annual gas costs alone could reach up to $180,000. I mean, that massive cost would be passed directly to investors, completely destroying your yield. It proves exactly why using Layer 2 solutions or custom enterprise chains isn't just some nice technical upgrade, it is economically mandatory if you want tokenization to actually work at scale.
So, we've hooked up the chains, fixed the data feeds, and slashed the costs. Now for part 4, hardening security architecture.
Here is the terrifying reality of blockchains. The security of the smart contracts is the security of the asset. There is no FDIC insurance. There is absolutely no undo button. If a single private key controls a protocol's treasury, that is a catastrophic single point of failure. So the industry standard to combat this is a multi-signature or multi-sig setup, often using something like a Gnosis safe. In a 3 of 5 configuration, any transaction requires 3 out of 5 designated people to approve it, and these keys are scattered. Maybe one is in a cold storage vault, one belongs to an independent auditor, another to an escrow agent. An attacker would have to simultaneously compromise 3 completely different entities across different geographies just to steal a single cent.
And beyond keeping the keys safe, the code itself absolutely has to be bulletproof. Independent audits are just table stakes at this point. The top security firms tackle this using highly specialized methodologies. Trail of Bits utilizes deep, research-driven manual review to hunt down crazy logic errors. OpenZeppelin provides battle-tested, pre-audited base code libraries so developers aren't out there just reinventing the wheel. And then you have Certora, taking it a step further with formal verification. They literally use automated mathematical proofs to guarantee that specific constraints, like making sure the token supply never exceeds the minted amount, are mathematically impossible to break. But we have to ask, what happens when this invisible architecture fatally fails? Part 5, Lessons from Mega Hacks. The history of decentralized finance is essentially a textbook written in stolen millions. Let's look at the actual devastation here. February 2022, the Wormhole Bridge loses $326 million. Why? A simple code update bypassed proper testing and time locks, letting an attacker easily spoof digital signatures. Just a month later, the Ronin Bridge loses that staggering $625 million we talked about at the very beginning. The cause? A classic spear phishing attack that compromised the actual human beings holding those multi-sig keys. Fast forward to March 2023, Euler Finance gets drained for $197 million because of an incredibly complex logic flaw in how its smart contract components interacted with each other. Phishing attacks, unverified code updates, logic flaws. These have caused billions in irreversible losses. Ultimately, these hacks are a massive wake-up call that architecture is about a lot more than just flawless code. You see, most smart contracts are designed to be upgradable, so teams can fix bugs or adapt to new regulations. But think about the profound risk that introduces. If someone can upgrade the contract, they can completely change the rules of the game. So I'm going to leave you with this to consider. When you invest in a tokenized asset, it's not enough to just know the code was audited. You have to ask yourself, who really controls the upgrade key to your digital assets, and what governance process is keeping them honest? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the architecture, and I'll see you next time.